Pirate School by Kathy East Dubowski and Mark Dubowski. Pirate School. Pete's family was a lot like other families. Every morning, his mom and dad got breakfast. His baby sister watched Jolly Roger's Neighborhood, and Pete rode the bus to school. Pete went to school on a ship. The ship was called PS1. The PS stood for Pirate School. Arg. Pete learned to add by adding up gold coins. He learned to subtract by making classmates walk the plank. The kids at PS1 were hard as nails, and so were the rules. Number 1, don't cry over spilled milk. 2, last one there is a rotten egg. And 3, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. Pete liked everything about Pirate School. Well, almost everything. He hated Gregory Grimes the 13th. The kids called him Grimy. And Grimy hated Pete right back. "You're too little to lift the anchor," said Grimy. "You're too big to get through the hatch," said Pete. "You little shrimp," shouted Grimy. "You big whale," shouted Pete. "Stop that," yelled their teacher, Captain Bones. Captain Bones did not like kids to call each other names. "Act like big pirates," he said, "and fight it out." So they did. "Who won?" "I did," shouted Grimy. "No, I did," shouted Pete. At Pirate School, the biggest day of the year was Treasure Hunt Day. Captain Bones held up a map. "The treasure is hidden here," he said. "X marks the spot. Find it, and you get to keep it." "Finders, keepers," hissed Grimy. "Losers, weepers," snapped Pete. All the kids rowed to the shores of Skull Island. Pete and Grimy fought all the way. "I'm going to find the treasure first," said Grimy. "No, I'm going to find it first," said Pete. On Skull Island, the class split up. They all ran off to find the X that marked the spot. Pete looked high. Pete looked low. "I've got to find that X before Grimy," he thought. Pete went deeper and deeper into the woods. "That X could be anywhere," he said. So he looked everywhere. No luck. At last he sat down to think, and suddenly he felt as if someone was watching him. Slowly he turned around. "The X!" he cried. "I found the X! It looks just like the one on the map." "Forget it," somebody yelled. "I found it first." It was Grimy. They had found the X at the same time. It was on the side of an old ship. "Scram," said Grimy, "the treasure is mine." "You want to fight about it?" said Pete. So they did. Captain Bones would have been proud. Crash! Pete and Grimy fell through the rotted deck, and down, down they went into the dark. Pete and Grimy hit bottom. It was dark and wet and smelly, and slowly their eyes got used to the dark. "Look," said Pete. It was the treasure. "We found it," they cheered, but they stopped cheering. They looked around. There were no steps, no ladder, no rope, no door. They were trapped. "We'll never get out," said Grimy. "We'll starve to death. By the time they find us, we'll be a pile of bones." Pete and Grimy sat down on the treasure and waited to die. "Hey, Pete," said Grimy, "are you scared?" Pete nodded. "Well, I'm more scared than you," said Grimy. "No, I'm more scared than you," said Pete. But before they could fight it out, Pete got an idea. First, he got Grimy to help him turn the treasure chest on its side, and then he made Grimy stand on top of the chest, and then Pete stood on top of Grimy. "Give me a boost," Pete cried, and Grimy did. Pete hit the deck with a thud. "Ouch," he said, "I made it." He grabbed a rope. "Tie this to the treasure," he called down to Grimy, and Pete turned the crank and pulled the treasure up. Pete couldn't wait to see what was inside, and he opened the chest. Wow! He had never seen so much treasure. "And it's mine!" he shouted. "All mine!" "Hey, Pete," called Grimy, "what about me?" Pete looked down into the big dark hole, and suddenly he had a terrible idea. I could just leave him there, he thought. He'd be a pile of bones, and I would have all the treasure. Aw, shellfish, said Pete. I just can't do it. If it weren't for Grimey's help, I'd still be stuck down there, too. And he threw down the rope and pulled Grimey out. Thanks, mate, said Grimey. I was scared you were going to leave me. No, I couldn't do that, said Pete, but don't tell Captain Bones that I saved you. He'd be mad. And together they carried the treasure back to their boat. Back at the ship, all the kids cheered, but Captain Bones frowned. We've never had a tie before, he said. I guess there is only one thing to do. Act like big pirates and fight it out. But Pete and Grimey had a better idea. We want to split it, said Pete. 50-50, said Grimey. Even Steven, said Pete. So they did, and that worked out great, until there was just one coin left. Pete and Grimey looked at it. Everyone looked at Pete and Grimey. What would they do now? Were they going to fight it out? No! They flipped for it. Heads, tails.